Hey, everybody. Welcome to Season 1, Episode 3 of the Dreamland Podcast. I'm your host, Mira, and tonight we're diving into shadow people. I love this topic. I love to be scared, but let me be honest, this research really frightened the crap out of me for more than a couple nights. Later on, I'm going to read you all some accounts of shadow people experiences, and finding good creepy ones to share with you kept me up more than once. So, are you afraid of the dark? A lot of people are. I sometimes am. It depends on the atmosphere. But what about the things that might be hiding there? That's where I think the primitive fear comes in. From Wikipedia, shadow people are defined as a shadow person, also known as a shadow figure, shadow being, or black mass, is the perception of a patch of a shadow as a living humanoid figure, and interpreted as the presence of a spirit or other entity by believers in the paranormal or supernatural. So what happens when someone thinks they're being visited by a shadow person? What's that experience like? And physically, how does that affect them? So when people have these experiences, they often start with a tingling sensation and or a buzzing sound, a feeling of electricity in their bodies, and a vibration. This is followed by being mentally aware of their surroundings, but unable to move or react to anything happening around them. They then feel a frightening presence whose purpose they believe is to hurt, kill, or frighten them. The commonalities of these shadow people include being a male entity, that they are aware of us and react to us observing them, that they are often 3D and have depth, that they have no facial features except sometimes red or yellow eyes, they are rarely reported to speak, and they can walk through physical objects like doors, furniture, etc. Let's talk about types of shadow beings. There are several and different experiences that have been grouped into different categories here. The first we're going to talk about is the most popular. He is my all-time favorite shadow person, and he's almost really his own entity, but he is still considered to be a shadow person. And of course, I'm talking about the Hat Man. So this type of shadowy visitor doesn't appear to mean any harm, but he definitely looks really creepy. The Hat Man is one of the most commonly reported types of shadow person. Witnesses describe him as a faceless, dark man in an overcoat and a wide-brimmed hat who watches silently from doorways. Watching me silently from the doorway is just as scary to me as coming towards me, I think. There aren't many accounts of malevolent behavior or any attacks attributed to this type of shadow person, but the Hat Man has been reported to induce feelings of apprehension or the inexplicable knowledge that witnesses haven't seen the last of him. A lot of times when people talk about being visited by the Hat Man, they'll talk about being visited all the way from their childhood up through adulthood. The next kind of shadow person we should talk about are the violent shadow people. Now, they may have plenty of ways to terrorize you without becoming violent, but some of them have absolutely no qualms about causing physical harm. People have reported being beaten, choked, or even picked up and dropped by aggressive shadow beings in their own homes. These beings usually don't look much different from normal shadow people, which is featureless human-shaped entities, but they definitely harbor some serious ill will. Fortunately, they're also the easiest to scientifically explain, since the shadow figures and choking sensations are some of the textbook symptoms of sleep paralysis, which is something we're going to talk about more in depth when we get into theories. The next type of shadow person is going to be the red or yellow-eyed shadow people. Now, most shadow people are described as faceless black silhouettes, but if you run into a red-eyed or yellow-eyed shadow person, you are in trouble. While they generally don't harm humans physically, The red-eyed and yellow-eyed shadow people are about as menacing as they come. Their only discernible features are their glowing red orbs that peer out from their pitch black faces. According to people who claim to have encountered red or yellow-eyed shadow people, their gaze causes unadulterated terror, and the more terrified the victim becomes, the stronger the shadow person will grow. So here's a common idea about shadow people, that they are there to feed off of your fear. Next, we'll talk about shapeless black smoke. Not all shadow people actually look like people. Even regular humanoid shadows, shadow beings, are reported to move in ways that are too quick and fluid to be natural. But misty shadow people appear as clouds of black smoke. Despite their weird forms, they give off the unmistakable impression that they are intelligent. According to some accounts, these black shadowy masses are attracted to people or places that give off negative emotions. So think about shows you might watch. One I can think of is called Paranormal Witness. I think it's on the Travel Channel. A lot of times you will hear someone recounting a haunting story, and it will include the facts that something horrible or tragic had happened in that house before they lived there, and now they see these dark, shadowy masses that scare the living crap out of them. But I guess that's what they mean when they're talking about the shapeless black smoke type of shadow people. The next kind we'll talk about are the Watchers. So, though most types of shadow people are known to stare incessantly, there's one type that prefers to snoop unnoticed. The elusive shadow people prefer to peek around corners and blend in with the shadows. If noticed, they will disappear immediately. Like the benevolent shadow people who make their observations more obvious, these elusive shadows don't incite any negative feelings, but some people believe that they serve as scouts for more malicious entities. Others, though, feel that they are just playful and curious. I am sorry, that would not be me. If I saw a shadow person peeking around the corner of my door at night, I would not think, oh, they're just being playful and curious. No, I would be terrified, and I would assume, I think rightly so, that they were there to either frighten me or to hurt me. So the last type we're going to talk about tonight is shadow animals. Shadow people normally manifest as inky outlines of humans or shapeless clouds of black mist, but plenty of people have claimed to see shadow animals as well. Shadow animals don't show up as often as shadow people, and they're more difficult to spot because they stay low to the ground and move astonishingly quickly. Shadow cats are the most common type of shadow animal, but there have also been alleged encounters with shadow rats, birds, spiders, and even apes. They don't appear to pose any more danger to humans than real animals do. However, some shadow cats, like real cats, aren't afraid to make life difficult for people or animals that they don't like. If you are a cat parent, like I am, then you understand that when they are unhappy or around someone that they don't like, they definitely do not hide it, and they will find a lot of ways to show you their displeasure. Let's move on. Let's talk about experiences. I have a few here, I think 3 that we're going to talk about tonight. I chose these 3. Obviously, they're from the internet, so I am in no way confirming that they are true, that these things really happened, that they aren't just stories made up by the writers. But each one has kind of a ring of truth to it and enough detail that you would assume that it sounds pretty possible to me. So let's start with our first story. After a poor night of sleep on Reddit, Lostful Codex on Reddit wrote that he laid down midday to take a nap. They recall a strange feeling in their head, but believed it to be a side effect of sleep deprivation. Then, from the corner of their room, they heard South Park, as if there was a television sitting right beside their bed, although there isn't. A ringing and high-pitched whooshing sound joined in the chorus. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't lift their arms or their head. Then they heard a knock at the window. Behind the glass pane crouched a dark, faceless figure. A second figure of identical stature entered through the bedroom door and sat at the edge of the bed. The shadow person spoke. I would be afraid too. This is what nightmares are made of. Lostful Codex, who was confident that it was a dream, but it seemed inescapable. The room faded in and out, then the user woke. It was easily the scariest experience they'd ever had with lucid dreaming. So, that definitely disturbed me. The worst part, obviously, of that story is when the shadow person sits down on the bed next to the writer and says, I would be afraid too. This is what nightmares are made from. I can't imagine. That would be it for me. I would be moving the hell out of my house. So let's move on to story number 2. It begins, I was around 4 to 5 years old. I have a great memory. It's kind of creepy to some because I have a photographic memory. Anyways, the house I lived in was my brother's. I swore it to be haunted. The basement was the worst. Picture this. You walk down a set of stairs and you look to your right. There's a rumpus room. Ahead of you is a doorway to the laundry room. To the left of you is a hallway. At the end of that hallway are 2 rooms on your left and your right. My older brother stayed in the room on the left, and his friends would not sleep over because of a shadowy figure in his closet, always staring at them while they slept. Or so my brother claims. The room on the right is where my uncle stayed. Now this is where it gets fucked up. My older brother was babysitting my twin brother and I, and we all played hide and seek. My twin and I were hiding while my older brother seeked. I ran into my uncle's room on the right and into his closet. I sat down on the floor and I felt a hand on my shoulder. At the time, I thought it was my twin brother. I remember asking, hiding in here too? To which there was no reply. 5 minutes passed and I felt cold, so I left the closet, thinking that my brother was following me. I went upstairs to the living room and both of my brothers were sitting on the couch, asking where I had hid. They couldn't believe where I told them because they think that the basement in general is creepy. Fast forward a few nights and my older brother was babysitting again, only my twin brother went grocery shopping with my mother and uncle at around 7 p.m. We were roughhousing and wrestling in his room, and we acted like we wrestled outside of the ring and into my uncle's room, which we considered a backstage. Mid-wrestle, the closet door swung open on its own like there had been a blast of wind. My brother and I stopped wrestling and stared in awe. A tall, dark shadow man walks out of the closet and my brother books it out of the room, leaving me behind. The shadow figure walks towards me and stops in front of me. I proceed to run out of the room and down the hallway, up the stairs, and by then my uncle, mother, and twin brother had gotten home as I started crying on the stairs. Rent went higher, we moved, and that was that, or so I was told from my mother. A few years ago, I get around to asking my uncle if his room was creepy in that house. He told me yes. His closet would open on its own in the middle of the night. He told me that a shadow man would sometimes walk out of his closet and would sometimes stand at the front of his bed. He also told me that this shadow figure wasn't evil and that he had a comforting presence, so he didn't complain much. The shadow figure only came around once every few weeks. My uncle then told me the house's grim history and the reason we moved. My uncle's closet. It had a cubby hole which led to underneath the house, and conjoined my brother and uncle's closets together, which made one long closet. A man was murdered in that house in the 1970s, and his body was found in that cubbyhole. My mother found out, freaked out, and moved us, blamed it on higher rent. My uncle knew, but he vowed never to tell us. So, this is more of a ghost story. I don't know about the uncle saying that he had this shadow person had a comforting presence. I can't imagine being confronted with a shadow person and feeling comforted. I mean, if you're going to be confronted by a shadow person, the one to be confronted by is the happy, nice one with the comforting presence. But, what are the chances of that? Story number 3 is the last one I'll be reading tonight, and it's definitely the most disturbing. It's also a little bit longer, so if you need to get a drink or a snack, now's the time. Pause the video and then come on back. Here we go. They write, shadow people are some of the most menacing and frightening entities around. I believe they are of a demonic nature. Not only do these dark, shadowy figures cause anxiety and terror, but often enjoy terrorizing people in their beds. Most shadow people are not alone, but have partners in crime. The shadows that terrorized me were never alone. Sometimes my bedroom would be filled with dozens, big and small. Some could touch me. These shadows would pinch me. It wasn't till I was maybe about age 9 that I finally told my parents about these entities, and it caused quite a stir in my family. As usual, my parents thought I was suffering from nightmares and suggested I eat less before bedtime. Without fail, these shadows returned every night. It wasn't until one night I couldn't stand hearing their laughter that I resisted their powers to make people catatonic or in a paralyzed state, that where the reality of the situation was no longer a joke to my mother. As my bed began to shake violently, as if a giant hand was shaking it, I jumped out of bed and ran so fast that I don't even remember running to my mom's room. I jumped on her bed in the dark, and her bed started shaking too. She held me in her arms as she prayed out loud to God, and slowly the shaking resided. By the end of the month, we moved out of that home. Now, this is what I gathered from that experience. 1, that house was extremely old. I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but there was a bad vibe there from day one. A lot of crazy things happened there with my family fighting. It was all the time. Never in the history of my family had there been so many arguments and cases of domestic violence and abuse. 2, besides fights and arguments, there was a vibe of mischievousness. When I played in that house, it was almost as if all of us were in some kind of altered state, like some kind of dimensional trance. A good example of this was the movie E.T., where the kid gets aroused in the classroom and he starts releasing the frogs. Yeah, I can't remember the whole thing. Let's just put it this way. I guess I went through intense puberty around that time. I remember having bad thoughts all of the time. I remember having my best friend Diana flirting with me and acting mature, but only in the house. When we played outside, she was a normal kid. I swear this house had some effect on people's feelings and whatnot. The strange thing is that I don't remember much of my childhood in the house, as I remembered most of my childhood in school or playing outside. I remember being cruel to my pets. I was never like that, but I became quite a bad kid in this house. Outside, I was quite normal. Just to jump in here real quick, what this brought to mind right away was the Amityville Horror and how the demonic presence in the house took over the personality of the father and made him do some horrible things. That's a really, really scary thought that something that you can't see or touch could come into your home without you knowing it and alter the behavior of the people inside, that something could be controlling you and you wouldn't be able to control yourself. That's a huge, like, creepy fear. I don't like that at all. It's one of the reasons I can't watch the Amityville Horror. That part of it really, really is what scared me. Back to the story. The strange thing is that we moved about 5 blocks away from that house into a new apartment, and I thought things were back to being normal for almost half a year with no incidents. No fights between mom and dad. When we all got together, it was fun again. I noticed it right away when the vibe changed. I noticed that the old house was really dark inside. Half a year passed when I had my last incident one night. It was early, maybe 2:30 a.m. I had woken up to use the restroom, and I was maybe about 10 years old. I remember laying down in the bed and getting comfortable when I felt my bed got shoved from one side. At first I stood still, as I thought maybe it was an earthquake. It passed, and I played it off. It's just my imagination. As I began to fall asleep, I had the sensation of being cold and clammy, so I covered up. I felt feverish, and I felt a small pinch on one of my toes. I became frightened as I looked around in the dark and saw 3 black outlines around my bed. The shadows were back. I became paralyzed as I screamed for help. I'm still not sure if I did try, but nothing came out, or if I imagined screaming out. The point is, I was freaking screaming. I felt some cold weight on my chest as I came face to face with one of these entities. Still paralyzed, it looked me right in the eye, and this is what I saw. Its eyes were black as black velvet and evil looking, but the outside of the rim was a yellow line. It was all around the outside perimeter of its eye in a pattern and moved counterclockwise. Its 2 other shadow friends had red and the other full yellow eyes. It was unreal as they all burst out in this wicked laughter and vanished. They never bothered me like that again. So, wow. That's absolutely terrifying. I know that feeling of waking up scared. In my case, it was from a nightmare when I was a kid, and trying to scream for help, but nothing would come out, and that terrible panicked feeling that you get. I've only experienced it that one time, and believe me, I never want to experience it again. So that's our third story, and that's it for tonight's stories. So let's move on to my favorite part of the show, which is always theories. First, we're going to talk about the scientific possibility. Say you're walking down an empty street alone. Suddenly, you have the eerie feeling that someone's following you. Is your mind playing tricks on you? Maybe so. According to a study on a scientific region of the brain called the, bear with me here, left temporoparietal junction, or TPJ, is stimulated, it can create the illusion of a shadow person. Given that such experiences are often heightened in psychotic disorders such as schizophrenia and paranoia, and even in those who believe they've been abducted by aliens, the results could lead to a better understanding of these neurological conditions. The finding emerged by accident. This is the only study I was able to find on shadow people, and it was published in Nature in 2006. So it's pretty old, but like I said, it's the only thing I could find, and I spent a long time looking. So it's called Introduction of an Illusionary Shadow Person, and neurologist Olaf Blank of the Brain Mind Institute in Lausanne, Switzerland, and his colleagues were attempting to identify the source of epileptic seizures in a 23-year-old woman. They applied a mild current through surgically implanted electrodes to various regions of her brain. Not much happened until the researchers stimulated the woman's left TPJ, located roughly above the left ear. Suddenly, she reported feeling the presence of a mystery person behind her, a motionless and speechless shadow that imitated her body posture and actions. He, and I'm saying he because she said that she perceived it as a man, lay beneath her when she lay down, sat behind her when she sat down, and attempted to actually take a test card from her hand when she tried to participate in a language exercise. She described the experience as disturbing and unpleasant. Sounds it. Such delusions are similar to those seen in patients with schizophrenia, says Blank. Schizophrenics often mistake their own bodies for someone else's. For example, they attribute their own actions to others. They also have frequent illusions of being followed or controlled by a stranger, as do those who claim to have been manipulated by aliens. Here we go again with the alien abduction creeping in here. Blank says the shadow person phenomenon may shed light on how the brain perceives self. In order to recognize its own body, he says, the brain uses sensory information, such as visual and proprioceptive cues, which indicate the position of body parts relative to each other and everything else. The TPJ is known to put some of these cues together. When this function is disrupted, the brain perceives two bodies instead of one and mistakes the second for that of a stranger. It's a valid idea, says neurologist Pawan Sinha of Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Boston, but this might be just one of many mechanisms that generate such hallucinations, he says. It's fascinating, right? This, to me, reminded me of, if you've heard of the God helmet, it reminded me of that. The God helmet was an invention that does the same thing. It delivers like an electrical current to a particular part of the brain, and when that's applied to the person who's wearing the helmet, they were able to perceive a higher being, a higher power. They thought they were in the presence of God. So maybe one day I can talk a little bit more about the God helmet. It is really interesting if I do a show where like I talk about shorter topics and, just throw a couple things in there. It'd be really fun to talk about that. Let me know if you want to hear it. So the next thing we'll talk about is sleep paralysis. And I got this information from the Mayo Clinic online. Also known as ISP, isolated sleep paralysis, or RASP, recurrent isolated sleep paralysis, is a temporary inability to move or speak while falling asleep or upon waking. Sleep paralysis most often occurs in people who have narcolepsy or sleep apnea, but it can affect anyone. With sleep paralysis, the mind breaks out of REM sleep before the body does. So this was super interesting to me because I have sleep apnea, or I did the at-home sleep test that your doctor sends you home with, and that came up as positive for sleep apnea. I woke up like a million times that night. I forget what the number was. And I actually have an appointment to go into the hospital right before Christmas to do an in-hospital sleep study to get a definitive diagnosis. And I don't know what I'm going to do because I am claustrophobic, so wearing a CPAP mask is not going to be possible for me. But this really does interest me because I've actually never experienced sleep paralysis, and I would wonder what the percentage of people who experience sleep paralysis, what percentage of them do have narcolepsy or sleep apnea. But I could not find any numbers for that. So sleep paralysis is very common. It is, there are more than 3 million cases per year just in the US. So this is a butt ton. It's usually self-treatable. It's usually self-diagnosable. And you don't need lab tests or imaging to be diagnosed with sleep paralysis because I guess, when it happens to you, it happened. There's no questioning it. So episodes involve not being able to speak or move while falling asleep or upon waking. This usually lasts for 1 to 2 minutes and is often frightening. Treatment depends upon severity. The main treatment is improved sleep habits or sleep hygiene, including going to bed at the same time every night, ensuring a comfortable sleep environment free of distractions, and avoiding caffeine before sleeping. So there's actually a documentary called The Nightmare that explores sleep paralysis, nightmares, and shadow people. I watched it yesterday. If you'd like to check it out for yourself, I found it for free on the Tubi app. And it follows several people talking about their shadow person experiences, along with some creepy kind of horror style recreations. It was really good. I did see it was available to on Amazon Prime, and I think it was also available to rent on YouTube. But like I said, I found it for free on Tubi, so I just watched it on my tablet. But it was really good, and if you like to be scared, check that out. Again, it's called The Nightmare. The next theory is that these beings are simply a form of spirit or ghost. Perhaps they are spirits that are bound to earth as a shadow as a result of meeting a violent end. Perhaps they appear as a shadow because they are still living in a moment long past, a shadow of the past. It could be that spirits just manifest themselves in a variety of ways, one of which just happens to be a shadow. I personally tend to lean far away from this theory. I think that ghosts and shadow people are completely different entities. I don't think they have anything to do with each other. But it's a valid theory. Next, how about these beings are astral projections? Astral projection occurs when a person's consciousness leaves their body, either knowingly or unknowingly, to travel. This often occurs during sleep. A person may think that they are having a very realistic dream and wake up with a jolt caused when they return to their body. Many people, however, practice astral projection and can do it whenever they like. Some people believe that when someone sees a shadow person, they are really seeing someone in their astral form, or on the astral plane, or any number of other planes for that matter. Some theories are that these are interdimensional beings from parallel or other dimensions. When we see them, we could be catching just a glimpse of someone from another dimension or someone traveling between planes and dimensions. Sure, I think this is possible. I believe 100% in parallel universes and the existence of other dimensions, but I still think that they are not just regular beings. The fear that comes along with them seems to be something much more serious, which is the next thing we're going to talk about, which is demons. And I should tell you that while I lean heavily towards this idea, I don't believe in demons. I was raised Catholic, went to Catholic school, left that behind around the age of 11 when priests and nuns and my mom and, my grandparents couldn't answer questions I had. And also when I started learning about how there were so many other religions on the earth and thinking, what were the chances that I was born at the right time into the right family with the right beliefs? Out of all the other times and places I could have been born, it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I today am agnostic. So demons are something that Christians believe come from hell. I also don't believe in hell, so I don't believe in demons. But I do believe in malevolent, dark energies. So according to some, shadow people could also be demons or other dark evil beings manifesting in shadow form. This comes from the feeling of fear or dread that some feel